I'm Crystal the Cottage Witch, and today we're going to be talking about the folklore and the facts behind ley lines. Now, I want to preempt that before we begin, I did write a script for this because normally I kind of rant a little bit. I know, I'm sorry. But I typed out everything that I wanted to say, and I put on a PowerPoint behind my phone, so if it looks like I'm not looking at the screen, I'm sorry. I just want to give you guys as much information as possible. But before we begin, I want to put out some disclaimers. Ley lines, or a ley line, is a relatively new term. It was coined by Alfred Watkins back in 1925, so at the time of me filming this, 2024, the term isn't even 100 years of yet. But if you're pagan, spiritual, or just merely curious in this category, you probably would have heard this term your whole life and not even thought about it. So, what are ley lines exactly? Ley lines will have an exact different meaning to different people. For the sake of this video, we're going to stick with the baseline definition of a network of energy fields, lines, or energetic traces that circle the earth. They're also not visible as well. The only analogy that I can think of is relating them to constellations. You know the stars for Orion, or this belt at least, but you have to apply your imagination in order to fill in the blanks for a direct image of a man that's not a stick figure. You kind of have to fill in the blanks with your mind. Ley lines are also not proven by science. There is no scientific evidence that either supports or denies the existence of ley lines.
But there's a heck of a lot of speculation, though.
Some of these speculation includes magnetism or mineral deposits such as quartz or lime or even copper, but so far, no proof in a pattern has been found. And there are a few projects and experiments that were tested out to see if any ley lines have any scientific backing. So I think the most well-known of these experiments were carried out by the Dragon Project in 1977. These experiments and tests ran for 10 years, looking for things such as magnetism, radiation, doing thermal imaging of the ground, ultrasound, infrared, anything that you could think of, they tested for it at that time, until moving on to a new tactic 10 years later in 1987. That was an interesting one. So, in 1987, the Dragon Project switched over to dream work experiments. So if you know me personally in real life, you know I'm all about honorific magic. So honorific magic is dream magic, in case you've never heard that term before. But while these people seem to have very interesting dreams along these ley lines and at these ancient sites, there was still not enough pattern to suggest evidence for ley lines. By the way, all these types of studies and things for ley lines falls into a branch of study called meteorology. So I'll leave that little tidbit there just in case you want to do your own research, because it is an absolutely fascinating rabbit hole. But we're going to jump back to my man Alfred Watkins real quick. So when Alfred wrote his book in 1925, The Old Straight Line, where he coined the term and discovered ley lines, he didn't believe that there was any magical or mystical significance to ley lines at all. It was very common for roads back then to be as straight as the terrain would allow to connect to all these sites. Keep in mind, he was in the UK, and because of this, paired with how humans are naturally pattern-seeking individuals, this could explain the existence of ley lines. Allow me to present you with more information first. The more you know, right? So now's the fact where we're going to combine some famous and some obscure folklore with some of the facts that we know to be definite to get both sides, you know. Rainbow. The reason why so many people could believe in ley lines or energetic traces around the world was due to the fact that this idea and belief system were a part of so many diverse cultures all across the globe, way before Alfred went for that drive that day and noticed all those synchronicities. In South America, the Incan Empire did this purposefully. They had a series of ritual pathways that, all right, I'm probably going to butcher this pronunciation. Please correct me if I say it incorrect, but Psychuas? I think it's pronounced Psychuas. But these Psychuas raided out of the capital. Though we still don't know why they did this or how they determined the course of these Psychuas. So in Hopi belief, there's Grandmother Spider, who sent her webs of energy into a crystal that was at the center of the earth. When her webs of energy hit the crystal, it reflected off, radiating in all directions to create the spots of Feng, or the power spots of the world. So, moving on to some of the oldest myths of ley lines that I was able to find are that of the Australian Aborigines. So, they had believed that a network of ancient trackways, believed to be the routes that the ancestor took in their spiritual form. And when the ancestors traveled across these sacred paths, they imbued it with their divine essence. It seems that, like, a lot of cultures had this belief too, as you'll see as we go through this video. The Australian Aborigines called these song lines because the paths of these trails were written into their music. However, they're often referred to now as the dreaming track. I find all of this so fascinating because if you look up some of these ancient sites with like their ley line correspondence, so much comes into play. There was such a knowledge of mathematics, which seems so hard to compute with like our understanding of how we were taught how our ancient ancestors were. Some of these sites are placed at repeated equations of distance, sometimes expressing the golden ratio and the geodesic dimensions of the planet. Going back to what I said in the beginning with ley lines being likened to, astrological constellations, it gets even more interesting to me as a lot of these sites do line up with certain constellations or celestial bodies. Am I being just a reaching, pattern-seeking human? Well, let's dive in a little bit more and see what happens. I'm going to give you a direct example of how I find this so fascinating. So right now, we're going to look at the St. Michael's Line, which is a very famous ley line. It is 3,500 miles long from within the UK, extending into Russia and further than that, as most would believe. Every year, on May 8th, which is the day that the Latin liturgy celebrates the apparition of St. Michael, where doorways, entranceways, etc. of all these different places are perfectly aligned with the rising of the sun. I could already hear some of you saying, so that doesn't matter as long as the building was set up the right way. Well, on average, the observed position of the sun at the horizon shifts anywhere between 20 to 30 miles. So that makes it a little bit harder to explain. It's just not as easy as waiting on that specific day that you want the sun to come in, marking where that light comes in, and then building around it so a year later so it works. It takes a lot of complex mathematics. It's not just a beam of light and waiting for it to light up something. It's not that easy. So there's also an 11th century book titled The History of the Kings of Britain, where it talks about the ancient and legendary king, Belinus. I'm going to pause right here to bring attention to this because I never see this mentioned. However, Belenus was most likely named after the Celtic god Belenus, who was believed to be tied to Beltane. That I figured everyone would figure out. But Beltane is also the festival where the veil is at the thinnest besides Samhain. It's the halfway point to Samhain. When it's Beltane in the northern hemisphere, it's Samhain in the southern, and vice versa. The veil is at the thinnest then, and that's when communication with spirits and the Fae are encouraged. But no one points that out. I'm just going to point that out for you real quick. But anyway, Belenus, the king, had called together all the great men of his country to build these sacred highways, one running straight across and two diagonal, meeting at the center of the island. These were sacred roads. There were supposed to be quotations. I don't know what this was. That didn't look appropriate. Sacred roads. Sacred? Sacred? I thought I saw a putty cat. Sacred roads, in which the travelers were protected from arrest or attack, which also shows how connected everything is in a way. Because of these intersecting lines meeting, we automatically think of Crossroads and that liminal space. From Papa Legba to Hecate to the roads of dusk and dawn washed over by Ellen, the Crossroads are believed to range from the underworld to meeting with spirits and deities to communicating with the Fae. It's never deemed in folklore as just a normal space, and this is spanning over many cultures, not just one. Maybe I'm just proving that point more that humans are, pattern seeking. I don't know. But I'm calling out the patterns and the connectedness as I see it. I will throw in right here that it is speculated that King Arthur could have used King Belenus' sacred highways on, his great travels, but that's just speculation on top of a fantastical legend in itself. Now that we've touched on different origins of ley lines, how did these people with these beliefs feel like these places of energy were used? Well, it seems that the living were not the only ones to use them. Depending on how familiar you are with different folklore, you might remember hearing that spirits would travel on invisible but straight pathways. Hence that feeling of a spirit just went right through me if you were standing at a certain spot at like a certain time. These invisible but straight lines were called coffin paths, coffin ways, ghost roads, corpse ways, or the long term, the flight path of the corpses. That's like a mouthful. When passed down through oral tradition, it's interesting that these lines line up with known ley lines. They started to record keep these ghost roads and such during medieval times when they wrote down the oral tradition of these stories. Who knows? A bad game of telephone, and there could have been errors, when these were being officially documented, and way before that throughout the centuries. Having all these corpse roads and ghost roads is obviously going to bring in more spirit lore, because not only did it run through the physical terrain, it ran through the invisible one as well, the unknown one. And this is all over the world, not just the UK. But hey, that's how the lore of contagion works, right, witches? Now you wonder why so many things are left in these places. Again, belief in these ghost roads were all over the world, not just the UK. Like in Germany, for example, there was a belief that at certain times, spirits would make their pilgrimage from one graveyard to another on these invisible roads. It seems that they would head to a ghost party and, meet up with their ghost friends, but they were always in a straight line from graveyard to graveyard. Even if there was a house, a person, or a mountain in the way, they would just go right through. So since this is a witchcraft-based channel, let's sprinkle some witch stuff in with the ghost roads, right? So there was this practice. I just know it by, a few names, but it went by a bunch of different names. But the ones that I know them is Marks and Eve. Marks and Eve? I'm going to butcher that. It's such a tongue twister. I'll put the name of it up here. Church Watch and Sitting Up. There's a few other names for it, but those are the ones that I know them by. But during this, the village seer, wise person, or witch would hold a midnight vigil next to the graveyard entrance that would be used by the spirits. It was called a lich gate, but, whatever, moving on. The seer, wise person, or witch would use their second sight and watch for these spirits to go by. Normally, these spirits would go by as a group. So the reason why they did this was to see who would die within the upcoming year due to the belief of what they called doubles that would be walking with the ghosts. Think of, the folklore that you know about doppelgängers. If you see yours, you're rumored to die. However, in this belief, in doubles, if the watcher sees you, you die. Even if you're asleep and you don't see anything, you did. So, we got death, spirits, ancestors, future predictions, and protection on these invisible roads and lines so far. What else could there be? Well, obviously, Fae and nature spirits and elementals. I mean, come on. Now, the roads that the Fae took were called Fairy Paths, and yes, these were invisible. But if you were ever trying to find one, I'll give you a little, folklore tidbit. Look for a road lined with thorns. But please always use caution, and remember, knowledge is power. For these fairy paths, there were a lot of trooping Fae on these roads. But not only did these fairy paths exist on the ground, but in the air as well, and always in straight lines. Now, to tie these two together, the ghost roads and the fairy paths, I'm going to mention some common folklore belief, but I never see it discussed when it comes to the Fae, which is kind of weird. But this folklore belief is that fairies weren't always fairies. They were humans when they were first alive. However, they were the first humans with cause, with purpose, who were truly connected with the land. Think of a warrior or an old druid or a medicine person from anywhere in the world. They would die. They would become a ghost. They would wander the ghost roads. And then after an extended number of years of being a ghost, they would become a fairy. It's the same thing with elementals, but there's a lot more to that one. And same with ancients of the land. So in this belief, a fairy is actually an ancient human spirit, not its own entity, while a ghost is an old human spirit, if that makes any sense. Some fairies can be truly ancient in this belief, while others can be fairly new and just be a few centuries old. However, they are imbued with the land, and they can see past the artificialness of being human, if that makes any sense. But do keep in mind that a fairy could wander the ghost road as its time as a ghost a millennia ago, and now as a fairy, it will see everything through a new light. So there's also the belief of Feng Shui, which is still popular today despite it being an ancient practice. This is the belief of earth energy called Qi. It manifests as lungme. I might be pronouncing these wrong. Please feel free to correct me. I'd rather not be ignorant. I'd rather know the right words. Or dragon veins. I'll just refer to them as dragon veins, where the earth force comes up. However, dragon veins follow the terrain of the land. So they'll go in like mountains, they'll go on curves, they won't be in straight lines. But I figured I would add them in here because the St. Michael's line is at a dragon vein conjunction. We're going back to the St. Michael line. One of the popular things that St. Michael is known for is for slaying a dragon. And the St. Michael line has dragon vein intersections with tiger veins for a lot of these buildings. These crossover of dragon veins and tiger veins, the feminine and the masculine, create a polarity of very powerful chi, of earth energy. So seeing things from different beliefs come together on their own way is beautiful to me. Now, I can go into more details about invisible spirit paths throughout the world, from hellhounds to pathway magic to geomancy traditions, through threads, through the Nazca lines being well worn from being ritually walked for thousands of years, to more information about the Crossroads, all of which are deemed portals by all different belief systems all across the world. There also comes into play UFO sightings on ley lines, which seem to be heightened by these areas, which is pretty cool when you think back to ancient times. A lot of will-o'-the-wisps or ball of lights were seen around these paths. But also keep in mind there are natural explanations for some of these phenomena, but either way, it's fascinating to think of, isn't it? These balls of light were seen thousands of years ago, and people still see strange lights in the sky. Pretty cool. Now, remember back to when I said that scientific experiments were done to see if there are any definite patterns to these locations and if they came back as inconclusive? I'm going to touch back on that for a second. The only instrument that has repeatedly picked up energy from ley lines, not just ancient sites, are dowsing rods. They're the only instrument that has picked up a pattern in this, but because of the chance of ideomotor phenomenon, you don't know how many times I had to retake me saying that, they can't be the only source for scientific data. The ideomotor effect or phenomenon is when the person holding the divination tool for this example makes motions unconsciously, such as a pendulum or a planchette on a spirit board or a ouija board or a talking board or even dowsing rods, as well as automatic writing. But also keep in mind that dowsing has been a practice since at least the 15th century. There's actually some water companies that still use dowsing rodders today to find leaks. Thames Water and Severn Trent Water in the UK still use them. And dowsing rods are not just used to find water, but also mineral deposits, oil, and as well as it's believed and adapted that they also add in spirit communication as well. So it could go 50-50 that a spiritual device could be the only thing that would pick that up. You know what I mean? I think sometimes that we forget that the earth can be seen as a living and a non-living system. Not that it just hosts life. We live alongside that balance of life and death for a millennia. And we will continue living alongside of it for as long as humans are around, which I don't know how much longer we're going to be around for, but anyway. The magnetic field on average for the surface level of the Earth is 22,000 to 60,000 nanotesla, or about 0.22 milligauss or 67 gauss. Gauss is more familiar to people as how intense a magnetic field is in an area, especially where spirit energy is thought to be. Think of paranormal investigating when you see your K2 or your Gauss being spike. Again, no scientific evidence for it, but I figured I'd put it in more relatable terms. A belief in a network or sacred or ritual pathways and roads existed across the globe way before the term ley lines was a thing. Our ancestors felt this special connection to the earth and these certain places. If you subscribe to the idea of collective consciousness, this could make more sense to you. And why there's a similar belief in a time where no cross-communication of similar beings and entities and beliefs adapted, but, just slightly influenced by culture. If you don't subscribe to that idea, maybe you think or believe that there's something actually there that our ancestors noticed and they all went through the same things, hence why it became so ingrained in them. Maybe you believe it's something else entirely. Or maybe you don't believe in any of this and you just found it interesting or boring. I wanted to touch on this topic because I love folklore and ancient beliefs, because so much of it is tied in with my personal witchcraft practice. I'm very earth-based in general, But while I do have a decent amount of mystical and celestial workings that, I do, the old legends and the folklore and the wives' tale and the mystery of everything, they all just have such a special place in my heart and helps me shape my craft. As so much power and energy has gone into these beliefs for so long that they seem to have shaped themselves into their own egregor. So if you are familiar with tulpas, egregors, servitors, thought forms, god forms, all that stuff, maybe that might make sense to you. I had also wanted to move on to talk about types of earth magic, working with spirits in nature, truly connecting and listening to places. We always forget to listen to the places that we're in because they have stories to tell us. So I thought I would start with covering some topics like these. I hope this wasn't boring for you and you found it interesting, because I know I do. I could have put so much more into this video, but I didn't want it to be like a full documentary. It's always good to have some background information before you start a subject. And of course, I want you to have your own judgments and your own beliefs on this, and I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions down below. I might do 2 or so smaller videos on folklore and ancient secrets and things like that before going into, the earth magic and everything else that I wanted to go into. You know what I mean? Again, thank you so much for letting me be able to talk about this and having other people who want to hear about this and who want to talk about this as well. Please communicate your own thoughts and opinions with me below down in the comments, even if they're different from mine, even if you don't believe in any of this. We all learn from each other every day. We never stop learning and we never stop growing. It's always good to talk to someone with a different perspective. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, and I hope good things happen to you. Bye.